So you've made a 3D model and you want to import it into Unreal. So to get started, I'm just going to take a look at my 3D model in Blender and make sure that the texture is properly applied, there's no tearing, everything looks correct, and I don't have any big issues that are super glaring right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this file from Blender by going to File, Export, and then selecting the FBX option. FBX is a pretty commonly accepted file format, and it works with both Unity and Unreal, so it's going to work. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that the only thing I have selected in my scene is the object that I want to export. I don't want to export my camera position information or my light position or this backdrop that I made for an animation. So I've selected this can, and you can check in the hierarchy that just this can is selected, so that's correct. And then we want to go down to selected objects and check that. So this will only export objects that we have selected in the hierarchy, meaning it will only export this can. Next, I want to make sure that my textures are included in the final export to the FBX. So I've made this texture in Photoshop and applied it, and then I've made this material in Blender. It's just a shader that I made in Blender and I've applied it. And I want to keep the information for those because even though I could just drag my texture in to Unreal, I would lose all this kind of shader information that I did for the metallic and the roughness to make it look more like a soda can. So that's why I'm going to set my path mode from auto to copy, and then make sure to check the box next to that that says embed textures. Now we're going to move on to the transform. So in Unity, Y is up and Z is forward, but we're exporting into Unreal. So if we go into Unreal, I have a default scene open. I'm just going to drag a cube in, set its transform over here on the right to 0, 0, 0. Now I'm going to drag up, and that changes the Z value. So we know that in Unreal, Z is up. And I'm going to drag forward, and it changes the X value in the negative. So we know that Unreal is a Z up, negative X forward program. So we'll want to use those export settings in Blender. So negative X forward, Z up. Now I have some animations on this file that I don't want to import into my Unreal project, so I'm just going to uncheck this bake animation box. If you have animations that you do want to include, you'll have to import your file a little bit differently, but you'll want those bake animation settings checked on. I'm just doing a static mesh today because I don't want to import some animations right now. Next, we need to name it something that Unreal will accept. Key note here is that Unreal does not accept files with spaces in them. So you have to either change it to something with underscores. So liquid courage. It'll accept that. Or you could do something like camel case where it's no spaces but capital letters for each word, or whatever file naming format works for you as long as it doesn't use spaces. So now I'm going to export this, and I'm going to open Unreal. And so here's our default scene. I'm just going to get rid of this cube by selecting it and hitting delete on my keyboard. And now I'm going to make a new folder to put my models in. I already have a models folder, but this is just for demonstration. So name this models and spell it correctly if I can. And here's a neat trick. You can right click it and choose the color of your folder if you want to use a color coding process. So I'm going to make this green because I like the color green. Next, I'm going to right click and then go up to import asset. And this is the folder that I've saved my file into. Here's a file that I use for importing into Unity, but for this file, I want to import this directly. I want to import this one because I named it correctly. This is named for Unity, and this is named for Unreal. So I'm going to click on this, hit open. It's going to bring up this menu. This is just a bunch of parameters that you can set. Skeletal meshes for if you're doing something with animations. So we're going to leave that unchecked. There's a lot of extra stuff here that you can really get into if you want to. You can hover over the different checkboxes and it will tell you a little in one sentence what it does, but we don't really need to worry about that. So import translation, import rotation, we don't want to affect any of that. We made sure to import everything the way that we wanted it or we exported from Blender everything the way that we wanted it. And our import scale is going to be 1. I've had some issues in the past where when I import something from Blender, see, I made this Blender model, and if I go to my units, you can see that I used inches for my units. So the default unit in Unreal is a centimeter. It's a bit strange because you'd think it would be a meter, but it's actually a centimeter unless you change it. So when I import this, it's gonna be a little bit weird size-wise. So what you can do is you can either, if you know how big it is, if you've already imported it like I have and then deleted it, because I'm not going to do this tutorial without testing it first. I know that the proper size is somewhere around 0.1, but I'm also going to show you how to change that after the fact once you've imported it into your Unreal project. So I'm just going to leave this as 1. This is miscellaneous. This is convert to scene unit. I've checked convert to scene true and convert to scene unit true. The material is local and it will create new materials. So this is going to import all the materials that I've created, and local, it works for me based on the export settings that I used in Blender. I'm not using normal map, so invert normal map and all that doesn't mean anything to me. If checked, the material will be recorded. Yeah, I don't typically worry about this stuff. It's in a drop-down menu, so you really only need to mess with it if you know what you're doing and you want to change it a certain way. So there's this option to import all. I'm only importing one file, so if I hit import all or import, it makes no difference. But if you're importing, say, a file that is a static mesh and then a file that's an animation, you'll want to do import one and then change the parameters for another, because Unreal handles animations a little bit differently. So we're just going to import. And I've gotten some errors. I always get this error of export smoothing, but I know that I'm doing that. And it hasn't given me problems in the past. And look at that. It's already created materials for our object. It's imported my texture. It's imported the metal material that I made in Blender. And I can just drag this into the scene. And there we go. Now we have our soda can model in the scene. And so I'm going to go over to the right to the transform menu and look at scale. And so you can scale these numbers independent of each other, or if you hit this lock, it locks them all, so that this is not locking the scale, this is locking the parameters so that they all scale evenly. So if I hit 0.1 for my scale and then hit enter, it changes every value to 0.1. And so now our soda can is a bit more reasonably sized. So let's say we've done some editing and we want to re-import our soda can. Rather than just drag the soda can file in, all you have to do is right click and then go to re-import. And if you named it the same thing and saved it to your computer, it will just re-import it with no hassle, do everything perfectly fine, and you don't need to worry about it. So it's just that easy. You just right click and then re-import, and it remembers where the file was. But if you've made a new version of the file and you want to overwrite this file with that, then you have to go to re-import with new file, and then you select that file that you want to use, and then hit open, and it will re-import it. But it won't bring up that menu again for your import settings because you are re-importing and not importing for the first time. So that is how you import and re-import models into Unreal.